On October 31, 2025, the Supreme Court delivered a historic decision that would send shockwaves through the nation's political and economic landscape. In a landmark 6-3 ruling, the justices struck down former President Trump's sweeping tariff plan, ending years of legal battles and uncertainty for American businesses. The court found that the president had overstepped his authority by exploiting a national security loophole to impose taxes on imports, a power that, according to the Constitution, is reserved for Congress alone. Billions in tariffs on goods ranging from steel to electronics were declared unconstitutional, marking a major defeat for Trump's America First agenda and a dramatic shift in U.S. trade policy. The ruling reasserted the separation of powers, making it clear that no president, regardless of party, can unilaterally control trade policy without congressional approval. Outside the court, crowds gathered in celebration, waving signs and chanting in support of the Constitution, while Trump supporters voiced their anger, calling the decision a blow to American industry and jobs. The Treasury Department now faces the massive and unprecedented task of refunding billions of dollars to companies that paid the now illegal tariffs, a process expected to take months and involve thousands of businesses. Economists predict that consumer prices will fall as a result, offering long-awaited relief to households that have struggled with higher costs on everyday goods since the tariffs were imposed. For Trump and his allies, the path forward is now through Congress. No more sidestepping the legislative process on trade. Any future changes to tariffs will require open debate and a vote in the House and Senate. The era of executive-driven tariffs has come to a decisive end, closing a controversial chapter in American economic history. The balance of power between the branches of government has been fundamentally reshaped, reaffirming the core principles of American democracy and the rule of law. To grasp the Supreme Court's decision, we need to understand tariffs and their implications. Tariffs are essentially taxes on imported goods, often used to protect domestic industries from foreign competition. Trump made tariffs central to his America First strategy, arguing that free trade had hurt U.S. manufacturing and let countries like China take advantage of America's open markets. He imposed tariffs on steel, aluminum, and thousands of other products, aiming to boost American competitiveness and force new trade deals that would be more favorable to the U.S. Trump justified his actions using Section 232 of the 1962 Trade Expansion Act, which allows presidents to impose tariffs if imports threaten national security. He claimed a strong manufacturing base was vital for national defense, allowing him to bypass Congress and act unilaterally in imposing these tariffs. This marked a sharp break from decades of bipartisan free trade policy, which had generally favored reducing trade barriers. Supporters saw tariffs as a way to revive American industry and jobs, believing they would lead to a resurgence in domestic manufacturing. Critics, however, called it reckless, warning it would backfire on consumers and businesses by raising prices and sparking trade wars. The national security argument let Trump sidestep Congress, but it was controversial from the start, raising questions about the limits of presidential power. The debate became about more than just economics. It was about the extent of presidential authority and the balance of power in trade policy. Trump's approach forced a national reckoning over who controls trade policy and whether such decisions should rest with the president alone. The Supreme Court's ruling would ultimately settle that question, determining the future of trade policy and presidential power. The legal battle boiled down to a core question: who controls trade and tariffs, Congress or the president? The Constitution gives Congress the power to regulate commerce and impose taxes, a safeguard against executive overreach. Over time, Congress delegated some trade authority to the president for flexibility, especially in emergencies. Section 232 of the 1962 Trade Expansion Act let presidents impose tariffs for national security, but Trump's broad interpretation stretched this power. He used it to target not just rivals, but allies like Canada and the EU. Critics argued this turned a narrow exception into a loophole for protectionism. The Supreme Court had to decide: did Congress mean to give the president such sweeping power, or had Trump overstepped? The case became a test of constitutional limits on executive authority. The court's answer would redefine the boundaries of presidential power. The challenge to Trump's tariffs united an unusual coalition: businesses, conservative legal groups, and Democratic state attorneys general. Companies hurt by higher costs joined with free market conservatives alarmed by executive overreach. Libertarians argued tariffs distorted markets and set a dangerous precedent for unchecked presidential power. Democratic officials highlighted the economic harm to farmers and consumers. Together, they framed the case as a defense of constitutional limits, not partisan politics. The coalition chose respected conservative Michael McConnell to argue before the Supreme Court, appealing to the court's conservative majority. Their strategy focused on the Constitution's text, original intent, and the dangers of expanding executive authority. This broad alliance made it clear, opposition to the tariffs was about principle, not party. In the Supreme Court, the challengers argued the Constitution deliberately gave Congress, not the president, the power to tax and regulate trade. They said Trump's use of the National Security Clause was a pretext, exploiting a loophole to impose tariffs Congress never approved. The administration countered that Congress had delegated this authority, and the president had discretion to define national security. They warned that courts shouldn't second-guess the executive on security matters. The real remedy, they argued, was for Congress to change the law if it disagreed. The justices faced a stark choice: uphold broad executive power, or restore Congress's constitutional role. The outcome would set a precedent for the limits of presidential authority. The stakes were nothing less than the balance of power in American government. While the legal fight raged on in the courts and in Washington, Americans across the country felt the tariffs' impact in their daily lives, often in ways they hadn't expected. Prices rose on everything from washing machines to car parts as companies passed tariff costs to consumers. Everyday purchases became more expensive, stretching family budgets and forcing people to make tough choices about what they could afford. Some steelmakers gained from the new policies, but far more manufacturers and small businesses struggled with higher costs and growing uncertainty about the future. Many worried about how long they could keep their doors open. Farmers were hit hardest. Other countries retaliated with tariffs on U.S. exports, especially agriculture, devastating rural communities and putting family livelihoods at risk. Many family farms faced bankruptcy as markets dried up and prices fell. For some, generations of hard work were suddenly in jeopardy, with little hope for quick recovery. Economists found the overall effect was negative. Job losses in industries using steel and aluminum outpaced the limited gains in steel production, leaving many workers searching for new opportunities. Retaliatory tariffs erased years of progress in opening foreign markets, making it harder for American businesses to compete and sell their goods abroad. The trade war became a tax on Americans, disrupting supply chains, raising costs, and hurting the very workers and families it aimed to protect. The Supreme Court's decision promised some relief, but the scars of the tariff era would linger for years, shaping how Americans viewed trade and economic policy. The lesson is clear: trade wars have real, lasting costs for everyday people, affecting families, workers, and communities across the nation. The Supreme Court's 6-3 decision invalidated Trump's tariffs, calling his use of national security a constitutional overreach. The ruling reasserted Congress's authority over trade and taxation, closing the loophole Trump had used. The Treasury must now refund billions to businesses, a complex but welcome relief for many. Consumers are expected to see lower prices as import costs drop. For Trump and his movement, the ruling is a major setback. Future trade policy must go through Congress. The era of executive-driven trade wars is over. Congress now faces renewed responsibility to shape America's economic future. Lawmakers can no longer avoid tough choices on trade. The decision restores democratic accountability to major economic decisions. The balance of power has shifted back to where the Constitution intended. The Supreme Court's decision will echo for decades, not just in trade policy but in the structure of American democracy. It reaffirms checks and balances, setting a clear limit on presidential power, even in the name of national security. Major economic policies must now go through Congress, requiring debate, consensus, and accountability. The ruling strengthens the rule of law and ensures the power to tax and regulate remains with the people's representatives. While lower prices and refunds offer short-term relief, the long-term impact is a stronger, more accountable government. No future president can launch a trade war alone. The court didn't rule on the merits of tariffs, but on the process, restoring the constitutional order. By returning power to Congress, the Supreme Court has reinforced the democratic foundation of the republic.